one of the issues you've seen percolating around in probably the last couple years, and this was an issue nationwide, was teacher vacancies, particularly in public schools. And there was a lot of attention on Florida just because that's what corporate media does. And so I would talk to my guys, I'd be like, well, where are we on this? And we were below the national average even then when they were trying to make an issue of it. But there was an issue nationwide. So we went ahead and we did a series of initiatives to be able to channel some good people into positions that were needed in our school system. And I'm pleased to announce that as a result of those efforts and as a result of Florida's emphasis on education, we've now reduced teacher vacancies for the 2025-2026 school year by another 17.7%. And so we're now, yeah, it's good. So just in the last 2 years, if you look at all the vacancies 2 years ago, we've now filled 30% of those. We are attracting teachers. We've dedicated more than $5.9 billion towards teachers and pay increases, as I mentioned earlier. We've expanded the number of pathways for qualified individuals. We have our teacher apprenticeship program. Right now, more than 80 individuals are receiving on-the-job training from veteran teachers while they pursue their teaching certification, and nearly 500 more have applied for the program. More than 100 military veterans have begun their teaching career through a temporary teaching certificate through our military veterans certification pathway, and nearly 700 more have applied for the program. So we're here now to say that's a job well done. And what, the rate is now 1% or?
Just under that.
Just under 1%, which is far below probably the national average at this point. Now they won't do, they'll, like California could be this, or New York or whatever, and then it's just interesting who decides to try to make issues of Florida stuff. But that's just the way it goes. We understand that. So that's where we are there. Now I'm going to get our panelists to be talking about that and some other issues. But the one thing I will say on teacher pay, budget was signed at the end of June. Budget went into effect on July 1st. The money's there. What we've seen, unfortunately, in some school districts, not all, and not even most, but some, I think we had 16, that delays giving the salary increases to the teachers. And some of that was because of school unions. And what they would do is they knew they had this money that had to go to teacher salaries, so they would withhold that as a bargaining chip to be able to extract other things for their agenda that have nothing to do with increasing teacher salaries. So we got in a situation where, like last year, you had 6, 7, 8 months went by where some of these unions were holding up the pay increases for the teachers. That is not right. And so we don't want that to happen this year. It's important to get these pay increases out the door now, especially leading into holidays. People need to have the resources. It's an important time of year to be able to do that. So we, and Commissioner Kamoutsas is going to be all over this. We're going to be monitoring who is stepping up to get the money in teachers' pocket and who is dragging their feet. But some of these folks are going to say a little bit more about these unions. But they just had a big conference with the main teachers union nationally. I think it's American Federation of Teachers or one of them. And the stuff that they're doing these resolutions to adopt positions on whatever the trendy left-wing policy is. That it has nothing to do with educating the kids. And they become such blatant partisan operations that when they're withholding pay increases and using that, it's because they're trying to pursue this other agenda. And that's wrong. The schools are not the place for your agenda. The schools are the place to put the kids first and the parents first, and to get that money in the pocket of the teachers, which is what it's intended to do. So we hope to see all of these pay increases processed in teachers' pockets as soon as possible. We're not going to just sit idly by and let this drag out for months and months on end, where the teachers aren't getting what they need. So, these teacher unions, remember, when COVID happened, I said we have to have the kids in school. Now that was considered very controversial at the time. In fact, I don't know that there was anyone else saying that anywhere, any other governor, but it wasn't controversial if you actually looked at the data. If you got rid of the hysteria, if you ignored the media narratives, if you ignored the hysteria, if you ignored all that, and if you just focused on the data, it was obvious way back in the spring or summer 2020 when we were doing this, that we needed to have kids in school. And it was interesting, most of the teachers wanted to be back because they took pride in their role in these kids' lives. And it's like, okay, if kids can just sit on the couch and watch Zoom, then, why do we have all these schools and stuff? Of course it's not as good. Of course you're not gonna be able to do that. So we really said that. I remember Richard and I, we rolled that out, and oh my gosh, you would have thought that we were, it was, but the union opposed us. They sued us to try to lock kids out of school. If they had their way, they would have left the kids out of school indefinitely. And in some of the places where they run the show, they were locked out a long time in some of these places. And so, they would do these stunts like Richard's office. They have this, he had the biggest building, Stasi has it now in Tallahassee, the Department of Education building. First of all, you guys don't need that building that size, and they know that, and that's why we're doging state agencies in addition to local governments. And that was built long before I was there. But they would do these stunts where they would bring hearses and coffins and put them in front of the Department of Education, because they were trying to tell people, if you open school, all your kids are going to die. That's what they were trying to tell parents. And that was not justifiable. There was no data to suggest that. But that was the type of hysteria that was going on. And so, when that happened, I think a lot of people around the country saw these school unions for how partisan they'd become. And I kind of knew that before, but I don't know that it was as wide. And then you say, okay, who's fighting against your kid being able to get an education? It was those groups. And then come to find out, they've indulged on all these really, really strident leftist policies as if that should be what education is about. And so when I see them, slow walking pay increases, honestly, it's disappointing. But unfortunately, it's not surprising. So we can do better. We need to get that money out. And I'm really, really excited about the ability for the teachers to get that. And we'll come back for more next year when the legislature comes back in. As I said, I asked for more than what was eventually gotten. I think we can do better, and we're going to push to do better.